Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar for WebStorm. I'm Paul Everitt, JetBrains developer advocate, and I'll be your host. Do you like your development to be smooth, in the flow, joyful? Want to use modern JavaScript tooling to get there? Today, we're going to look at my new favorite, Vitest, the fast, modern test runner from the Vite folks. Joining me today are two special guests. First, Dominik is a software developer with over 20 years of experience and a core member of Svelte and Vite, plus a contributor to Vitest. Welcome, Dominik.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Did I leave anything out? Or are you like a contributor to 15 other things too?
Well, I'm building some smaller tools that Vite uses, for example, resolving TypeScript configurations. And I'm also a big fan of testing and continuous integration. I've done that a lot in my professional career. There's a small tool called Vite Ecosystem CI, which does testing on a different level, but that's for another time.
And that was the joke I was just about to make. The for another time, you're going to hear me say 20 times in this. I'll see you in this next time, Dominik, because I keep joking with him about coming back. Also with us is my colleague, Sergey Simonchik. Sergey works on WebStorm with external tools like test runners, voila, package management systems, and terminals, kind of like the hard stuff. In particular, he integrated Vitest with WebStorm. Welcome, Sergey.
Hi, guys. Thank you for inviting me. I am honored to be here.
Sergey and I talked a lot in the last few months as he was adding all of this support. I got irrationally excited about it, and I'm sure I left out some of the other things that Sergey does. Dominik, you're a heavy user of IntelliJ with the WebStorm plugin. You do open source with Vite and Svelte. Explain Vite to us and tell us what the last year has been like for the team.
Well, Vite is a very modern dev server and bundler that builds on many awesome tools to provide an awesome development experience. I mean, most of us have heard of it by now. It's been voted the most loved tool in many surveys in the past 2 years. And the core concept is that during development, it doesn't bundle your application. It serves really small files to your browser. And when you edit files, it only sends these edits to the browser and replaces the code without you losing state. So updates happen so fast, you really don't have time to move your eyes from your IDE to the browser. They already have happened by the time you get there. So
part of this is because modern browsers have advanced so much in the last 3 years, and these other tools that were written like 7 years ago or something weren't able to take advantage of all that, right?
Yes, of course. Like Vite uses loading ECMAScript modules directly into the browser, and this hasn't been possible 7 years ago. So the same isn't possible in the current implementation of Webpack, at least not to the same extent.
Right.
But everybody is catching up and finding new ways to build cool things all the time. So it's a great time to be a web developer because tooling has improved so much.
Right.
And
okay, let's switch over to. I'm sorry. Let me switch over to Sergey real quick. I remember you got started on Vitest integration right around the time I really started falling in love with Vitest. What do you think of Vitest, and what was it like? What was the work like to integrate it? Sergey, that one's for you.
Sorry, missed it.
You got started on the Vitest integration right around the time that I started falling in love with it. What was it like integrating Vitest, and what do you think of Vitest?
Well, I worked with Vitest actually. I guess you started working with Vitest earlier than me, I think. Yeah. Well, from my perspective, Vitest devs are very quick to answer. So everything what I was needed, it was provided to me. So it allowed to have a good integration to my understanding.
In fact, the point you're making, Dominik is in this webinar because I went to the Discord channel and got a very quick response. So you're exactly right about the Vitest devs being responsive. For this webinar, I'll be doing the driving over there, talking over there, communicating with all of you over here. And Dominik and Sergey will do commentary and answer questions. I'll stop every now and then and we'll take questions from the audience. As a note, I have the material for a tutorial for this. I just didn't finish in time. So watch the WebStorm blog later for an announcement. It'll be text and video. So let's go to the slides and start with some housekeeping. We like to make this webinar as live and conversational as possible. We want you to have fun, but I want to have fun too. So should you have any questions or problems or comments or really useful things to add if I missed something, please feel free to ask them at any time during the presentation in the chat in YouTube over here. We're also in Twitch. We'll pause a few times, take some answers, give some commentary. I will answer some of the questions, or we will answer some of the questions right in chat as things happen. Don't wait until the end of the talk. Ask your questions as soon as you have them. Always the first question, is this thing being recorded? It's YouTube. It's really being recorded. And at the end, it'll be available. But we will also announce it on our blog. Okay, with that set up, let's go ahead and begin. And switch over to my screen. Thank you. And the idea for this webinar is I want to teach you about Vitest. And I want to teach you about Vitest in WebStorm. But as part of a way of working, and Dominik and I talked about this, both of us really care about your development being a lot more productive, a lot more fluid, and a lot more joyful by staying in the IDE. So I'm going to show React and TypeScript from the Create React App project out of the box. And I'm going to show the way most people develop. They're sitting on a component. In this case, it's the app component, and they've run the dev server, and it's running down here, and I'm going to click the link, and it's going to pop up, and then I'm going to be like, oh, okay, now some development to do. I'll go back here, and then, okay, did it work? Okay, I got to go back. Yeah, it worked. Back over here. But then I do something maybe to break it, and I go over here. Oh, it's broken. Now I got to go to inspect something, and then I got to go to the console, and then I got to go back and fix it. Did it fix? Yeah, okay, it fixed. That's not very joyful. There's a lot of context switching in there. And if you've spent the time to learn your tool, the IDE, what if we could just stay in the IDE? Well, out of the box, Create React App can give you this experience with Jest. And it sets up a test by default, and it will render, and it will use testing libraries, React integration. And you can poke around, and you can find out if you made a mistake in a test. And we've got really good integration with this. You can walk up to a single test, run it, and find out it failed. And then go and walk through the debugger and all that stuff, and then put it back the way it was, save it, run it again, put it into watch mode, things like that. And this all works pretty well, but it's not as joyful as it could be, because what if it was a lot faster? What if it tapped into this modern tooling? When you start getting larger apps with Jest and all the tool chain under it, I've probably forgotten all the layers under it, Babel and Webpack, and if you got TypeScript in there and all these other things. And it's chewing up the universe basically every time it needs to render. As Dominik said, Vite is different. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. It's faster because it presumes in dev mode you're using ESM ECMAScript modules, and parts of it are written in Go instead of JavaScript. So there are several things that make this super fast, the watch mode with its dependency graph, and it can really change that experience. Instead of switching back and forth between the browser or sitting in Jest, you can go even further. Now, what if you wanted a testing framework that used Vite that also had all of these same ideas, modern, everything? It was written as if you had a browser or you had an environment in Node.js that supported ES modules. That is Vitest. And when I first looked at Vitest, the part that made me fall in love with it was this. I had a project, I couldn't really get it working after a full Saturday, couldn't get it working in Jest with TS Node, and out of the box, it just worked with Vitest. And then I started to appreciate the other features. So with that in mind, what we're going to show today is Vitest, but we're going to try and show you a way of working that puts tooling to maximum use, lets you stay in your IDE and stay in the flow. Now, I'll pause here real quick. I'll start with some commentary from Dominik because he and I have a similar opinion about trying to stay in the test.
Yeah. What you mentioned about keeping focus is being a very dear topic of mine. I've talked about it on last Svelte Summit, and I've shown ways how Vite can be used to build tools, not only for testing, but also for development in general and for understanding your applications better without losing focus. The thing you mentioned that Vite has this module graph inside the dev server that's always there and can be queried for information. And this context can be used by tools like Vitest to provide you a different, a new development experience that hasn't been really possible in this level of integration before. The information was always there, but it was pretty much dormant. Like every time the bundler ran your build, it built this whole module graph, and then the build was bundled and the module graph was thrown away. So you didn't really have it available all the time. You had to recreate it all over again. And now the Vite dev server just has this module graph available all the time and all the information that comes with it. And also the file watcher always knows which files in the workspace are changing, and you get events and you can react to them, and you can even send custom WebSocket messages to the client of the dev server that runs in your application in the browser and do custom stuff there. So it's really, the sky is the limit here in terms of what Vite enables us to build for better
on that developer experience. On that developer experience, when you're talking about the dependency graph, it's a really important point. Vite only does the work it needs to do. It knows what file changed, and then if you're in dev server mode, only takes care of that part. Then Vitest only runs the tests that need to be run based on what changed either in your tests or in your source. It's a weird feeling. You make a change and it says 2 tests run. Well, what about my other 98 tests? Well, they didn't need to run. Sergey, do you have anything you want to add at this point about Vite or Vitest?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Let's go ahead and get into getting started and getting set up with Vite and Vitest. I'll start with the Vite guide. So great websites for Vite and Vitest. Really great, comprehensive, but also easy and engaging and always updated. So if you go to the Vite guide, and I'll make this a little bit bigger. Vite is the French word for quick. Vite, trop vite. You can go to the section on scaffolding your first project, and Vite has a tool called a scaffold supported out of the box, which will generate projects for you based on templates. And they cover some of the things in the official templates. So we're looking at the instructions for scaffolding your first project, and later on they tell you about the templates that they support. You may have heard that Vite is for Vue because it came from the Vue folks. That was true but it's not currently true. In fact, it's getting so good that people in React are wondering if they should get out of the Create React app business. There was a ticket talking about that. So these are the kinds of projects that Vite officially supports out of the box, basically JavaScript and TypeScript versions of different kinds of templates. We're going to do just a vanilla JS without TypeScript first, and then we'll show later a React with TypeScript. So you can go to the terminal and you could type in something like this, and it will generate a project. But even though Vite is kind of young, it's already gotten mature enough to have good tooling support. For example, good IDE integration. So I will go to my IDE, and you can see I'm pretty minimal with WebStorm. I don't usually use Darkula, but this is a webinar and everybody wants dark theme. But I turn off tabs, I turn off all the tools, turn off a whole bunch of things. Usually I turn this off as well. And I will make a new project. And I will choose Vite, and I'll give it a directory name. And these are some of the choices. I will use node 19. In fact, it's from Volta, as you can see. WebStorm supports Volta. And I will tell it, nah, we're just going to use vanilla and no TypeScript. So I will leave that unchecked, and it will create a project in a new window on the wrong screen. Here, over here, come a little further. Here we go. And I'll go ahead and make this bigger. WebStorm very helpfully says, hey, you know, you got some packages. Would you like to install them? Yes. In fact, I would. And out of the box, I now have a Vite project for vanilla.js. I'll turn on the project tool window. We'll take a little bit of a look around. So I will start with the package JSON. Not a lot in it. If I was to do a file size on the node modules directory, it's a lot smaller than what you'd expect. Let's just put it that way. I know it doesn't do as much as Create React app does. For example, it doesn't include testing. But even after you add some of those things, it's a lot smaller. So I've got package.json, and the entry point for Vite is an HTML file. In this case, at the root. And this HTML file says, here is the universe. I'm going to go to the universe. This is what the scaffold generated for me. And it calls a function setup counter, which is in a file counter.js. And this is what kind of gives it the interactivity in vanilla JS. If you generate a scaffold from Vue or React or one of the others, you'd see something that would look a lot more normal for you. All right, with that in mind, I'll go back to the package.json. And what we want to do is see what this looks like running it. Out of the box, you have the dev server, you have the full build, and then this other one that I don't use. You might add one later for testing, for example. So what I'll do is I will run this using the gutter icon. You'll see this a lot in the talk. Let me go over and look and see. Yep, all right, we're good. Runs the dev server. It's all the kinds of things you would expect. And I'll click on the icon. Hello, Vite. Count as 0. And if I go back and change, for example, I will change main.js. Sure. And I will say, hello, Vite. Extra exclamation points. Yeah, it's fast. If I would have had that side by side, let me do that real quick. Tile to the left, and I want you to the right. And so how fast can I type and stay ahead of this? And when I save, all the kinds of things you would expect from a modern hot module loader. Right, so I'll get out of split screen. And I'll do a little bit more in the package.json. let's go ahead. That's getting going with Vite. So we installed just Vite, and we did vanilla JS, no TypeScript, and we looked at some files. We saw the dev server in action, made some changes. What I'll do is I'll go ahead and add Vitest. I'll use the nice WebStorm way of filling this in for me, and I'll install Prettier because my fingers do the Prettier stuff automatically. I'll get WebStorm to npm install everything for me. Then I will go to Prettier and enable it so that it takes over on, so it detected my Prettier executable. And whenever I do reformat code or save, it will Prettier things. Let me confirm that by going to maybe counter.js. Okay. And so we're reformatted. So I'll pause here for a moment. We now have Vite set up in a new project. We have Vitest set up in a new project. We'll talk about this real quick. If any of you have any questions about the setup, let me know. You'll see more of the Vitest in just a moment. Dominik, from a Vite team perspective, what does everyone think of the scaffolds and the templates?
Well, these templates are basically just basic starters for the vanilla JS. Like you've seen, there's only Vite as a dependency. There's literally nothing else, and there's just a simple JavaScript-only counter component. So these are more or less the minimal templates you can use to get started with Vite and JavaScript or TypeScript or some of the frameworks Vite supports, like Vue, React, or Svelte. But they are not really the most useful starters for big applications.
Right.
Like this is more or less for trying things, like demoing stuff like we do now. Actually, I have a quick question. In package.json, I saw that Vite was major version 3, but it should be 4 for the
right.
latest major.
This is generated by the scaffold, interestingly.
Yeah. We might have to look into that.
Yep. All right. Well, it's updated now.
Okay.
My impression is these scaffolds and templates are just intended to be for evaluation. If you want more full-featured starting points, if you go look on the website under community templates, people are using this tool called dgit. And that's it's a very low-end scaffolding thing. It's not interactive at all, but it's an easy way to publish a GitHub URL that will strip out all of the version history and give you a new starting point. Sergey, do you have anything you want to add from our side about hooking up to the templating and the scaffolds and supporting Vite first class?
Not sure.
That's fine. That's fine. I'll just go ahead and proceed. If you spot something that you want to chime in on, let me know. We're going to get into the Vitest part.
Okay.
Now. Yep, no problem. Okay, we're going to start doing some testing. And so the idea is this is counter.js. And what I want to do, you do this in React a lot, component-driven development. You have something that's too big and you break it into small components. So for example, this, the actual display of the count, we're going to put it in its own function. I'm not a fan of test-driven development where you try and get 100% coverage and the focus is on quality. I'm focused on convenience because I'm lazy. What's the laziest way for me to develop? So I'm going to start with an empty function. I'll do export. Make sure you do export function show count. It's going to be passed a counter and it's going to return. For now, it's going to return nothing. And I want to get into a test. I want to get into a test early so that I put it on autopilot and it tells me if I've messed up. So what I'm going to do is this is the way to signal my brain that I'm in joyful mode. I split the screen. I make a file, the test file, counter.test.js. And if I have my code on the left, and if I have my test on the right, and my test runner at the bottom, that programs my brain to feel oh, I'm in that mode, the mode where I'm in control and it's joyful and everything goes smooth. So I'm going to write a very simple test that I do this to myself all the time. I want a quick victory. So I just want to see if show count exists. So I'm going to write a test and I'm going to ask, I'm going to ask WebStorm to import it for me. Counter, or let's just say show count. Show count exists. I'm going to do an arrow function. If you come from Jest and this looks familiar to you, it's because Vitest wants to be familiar coming from Jest. Now I'm going to say it, and I'm going to import it also. It, expect. Expect, I'll say show count. I don't want to call it to exist. I use that syntax, not the capital syntax. And now I want to run this. And I'll get rid of these little panels down here, and I'll actually stop the dev server. I want to run this test. Guess what? There's a really easy way to run this test. The gutter icon. Walk up to this test, click. You have several choices of how you want to run it. So I'll run it under the test runner. Yay me. I was able to write an empty function. There are some other ways to run a test. If you want to run just this test instead of the gutter icon, you can click anywhere in the scope of there and run just this test. If you want to run everything in this test file, click somewhere outside of the scope, right click, and run. And now we're running everything in that file. You can do the same thing for directories. If I had src/counter, I could click on one of those, right click on one of those. And if I right click at the very top, it's going to run this special thing called all tests. We'll do that one in just a second. So back in my tests, I'm developing, and maybe I do something to make it fail. So for example, I change the function name. Now when I run the tests, it fails. And I get a little squiggly right there telling me why it failed. I put it back, I run the test, and it passes. That is a little bit of the cycle of code test, code test, code test, left, right, look at the bottom. This tool window has some things in it that help me in the process of working on tests and things. And by the way, Brian will answer your question in just a second. This tool window has some things where I can say, hey, don't show me passing tests, only show me failing tests. Some things for doing nesting, some things for rerunning or rerunning only the failed tests, and then lots of options that you can do as well. And one other thing I'd like to point out, and this is a mode that I've only started experimenting with recently. You could turn the whole thing off and you can run your test and it will appear, but you could make it fail. And so this is more useful in watch mode. And you'll get little squigglies over here telling you about the failure mode. So we'll get to that in just a second when we get into watch mode. I'll pause here. We do have a question from Brian. And I don't know if, Dominik, I don't know how much Vue.js experience you have.
Actually, a little bit, okay. But it predated Vite, so okay. I haven't used Vite with Vue a lot. You can probably just ask on Vite Discord. People are very helpful there. There's a Vite chat link on vite.dev, so it's really easy to find. And there is a legacy mode in Vite that allows you to use it with Vue 2. Vue 3 is the new default, so you probably should look at upgrading to Vue 3 and Vite this year.
As an example, here is the Vitest Discord server. So it's pretty active. All right, we will proceed and get into a little bit more of the star of the show. What I just showed you was the beginning of developing a subcomponent without ever going to the browser, using something that had good IDE integration and was super fast. So friction has already decreased. You're already in a pretty good spot. What if we made it even better? We're going to talk about watch mode, and then we're going to talk about debug mode. So for watch mode, basically it's going to start and then never stop. I'll put this back to working. And what I'll do this time, an easy way to run all the tests in watch mode, click at the root, right click, and run all tests. And you'll notice something's a little different here. The red button, it never stopped running. It's still running. Vitest started up and never exited. Now, what made it do that? I will go and edit my run configurations. The all tests test configuration is special because it selects this, and then Sergey made the decision in WebStorm, if you chose that, then I'm going to put you in watch mode. Now, how could you do it manually if you wanted to be in watch mode on a single test, a single file, etc.? I'll do that. I'll go back and I'll run this. And this time it went away. It stopped. I want it in watch mode. I'll edit that run configuration, counter.test.js. And they helpfully tell me what I might want to type in the Vitest options. So if I say watch, and I get some autocomplete, look at that. Now it's running, and it's running in watch mode. And so, for example, if I make it break, nothing has happened yet. Nothing has happened. I save, and it fails. So that's how to get into watch mode for smaller segments. When we take a little bit of a break, Sergey might talk a little bit about his ideas for making it easier to get into watch mode. So I'll stop this mode right for just this one test. And one other way of getting just a subset, and this is a Vitest way, is you can go to a test and type .only. And it will ignore all other tests, but I believe it's only in that file. If you have a whole bunch of other tests, it will run all of them if it needs to instead of just this one. When I'm in test mode, and I will go back to all tests. All tests, and it expects it to exist, so I'll make it exist. We all pass. And I'm sitting in this mode. And one of the things, so for right now, I will return 9. And I'll say expect it to equal 8. And it fails. Well, I could go look around down here, try and find out what the exact problem is, what test failed, and why it failed. But it's actually telling me in the editor, instead of having to go find it in the test window. Dominik and I were talking about not switching contexts, flipping to the browser, flipping to the browser's dev tools, going to the console or the inspector on a node, then going back to the editor. So what if we could stay in the IDE and not even switch context to the tool window? This tells us what test failed, and then hovering over that will tell me why it failed. Excuse me. It will even let me launch the next hero of the story, the debugger, by clicking on this, and I get some more actions that I can do there. So with this, I could minimize that tool window. I'm really distraction free now. And I could say, oh, I know how to fix that. I not get it to fix?
You have to call the function.
Oh, I didn't call it. Yes, thank you. All right. Good catch. Thanks. So this is a real distraction-free way of coding. This is what I'm going to start doing a lot more. A lot of the times I take the test runner window and put it on a different monitor pane so that I'm focused on my code. Okay, I will pause there. We will take some questions. We'll take some questions, and then Sergey, be prepared to talk about what you think on watch mode on individual tests. So let's see. A first question: can you make newly add configurations be in a watch mode by default? There is something you can do in our IDEs. This is a WebStorm question more than a Vitest question. If you go to edit configurations and you look here, these are the things that are the templates, so to speak. And I can go and edit the ones that these are all based on and change the default properties that will be used, for example, watch, whenever a test is created for this configuration type. It will not edit existing tests. It's only for new ones. That's a good question, Boris. Wait, is that Boris that asked that? No, Zorieski. I won't try to pronounce it. And it applies beyond just Vitest. Okay, so let's see. Yes, you can, and you're right. You can make a new template. AppTech said that. Best practices for Vite's snapshot tool. How can we make meaningful tests with it? Dominik, I don't really use snapshots. I probably should. I also don't like regular expressions. I don't know how I got to this age hating regular expressions. Do you have an opinion about snapshots?
Snapshot testing is a great thing. Like, you can do a lot of coverage with small tests, and you find changes in the output really quick without having to worry a lot. Vitest allows you to record snapshots really easily with the command line flag. And once you change something, you can update them with another command line flag. But as always, every time you have to update a snapshot, you have to be sure that the new output is actually the correct thing you want to do. So it is a great tool, but it comes with a lot of responsibility as well. So I probably prefer writing more targeted expect functions because they are less brittle and actually test more in more meaningful ways. Their errors tell you more about it. When a snapshot test fails, it just tells you, hey, in line 50 of that snapshot, something is different now. And you still have to go back to the code to try to find out what actually changed that line in the snapshot. So again, you are missing a bit of context and you have to manually recreate that. So use them with care. They can be a great tool. I use them in framework testing because it's really difficult to test some aspects of third-party library output really in a more meaningful way. But I wouldn't recommend them on regular unit tests, for example. It's more like for smoke testing or getting a general feel of what could break or not.
Boris, it sounds like you already know a good bit about snapshot testing. The only thing I'll add is I believe the Vitest folks want it to feel a lot like just snapshot testing. So if you're familiar with that, you'll be familiar with this. One last question, and then I'll hand it over to Sergey to talk about watch mode in the IDE. Lokesh is asking, quite new to Vitest. Thank you for joining us. Can you use it with Node.js-based API projects? Yes, in fact, I'm using it with something that Vitest has no idea about, 11D, specifically 11D 2.0. If I have time at the end, I'll show it. I've got a mountain of badass tests, and it is doing the job. It's letting me move and change freely. over to you, Sergey. Do you have any comments you want to make about WebStorm and watch mode?
Well, as you said, when we run all tests, we run it with watch mode by default. And in all other cases, we don't add a dash watch. Well, there are plans to improve this situation a bit and make it clearer if watch mode is enabled or not. Well, right now, yeah, and right now it was works this way. So I'm open to feedback as always.
If any of you in chat have any ideas about how you would like to make a test or a test module switch back and forth between watch and not watch, let us know. I had an idea. I gave it to Sergey, and then he had a better idea. So it's useful for him to hear opinions on this. Okay, we will continue on. I'm going to take a little bit more.
I have one question.
Yep.
I'm allowed to ask, right?
Oh, go. Yeah.
Okay, so we've seen you use Vitest, but I haven't seen you configuring it. What happened? Like in Jest, you have to do all of this bubble and loader and duplication of configuration.
Sure. Sounds like I paid Dominik to ask that question, because it is a big feature of this Vite and Vitest stack. Is it usually just works out of the box. Sometimes you need to configure it, and we will do some configuration in this next segment. And then we'll show a little bit more in the next segment after that. So let's proceed. And remember, you can configure both Vite and Vitest, and they both have really good pages on all the configuration. You can also use it out of the box as we are, and it's already adding a lot of value. So what I want to show this time is I tested a little function. I called it returned something, but I didn't really test the application. I never wired my function into anything. So I want to show a little bit more of a real world development experience. I'm looking at something and I'm like, okay, I'd like to make that its own dumb presentational component. And I'd like the IDE to help me on this. So I'm going to extract this as a method. And I'm going to say global to put it up in the top scope. And I'm going to call it, show count. I do need to go and mark it as exported. Now, when I save my tests, I should have stopped from the beginning. All right. I'm going to run everything again. And I get the fact that the count is undefined. Oh, well, let's see. I'm not passing it a counter. So I'm going to pass it 0, which is the starting point. And I expect it to have a string. So I'll copy and paste that. And that will be my starting point. And I'll ask Prettier to reformat that, save, and my test pass. And then later, if I make some capitalization change, my test will fail. And I'll know why things changed. It will tell me exactly the problem. And in fact, I could have had that minimized. I could see that there was a problem there. I could realize what my mistake is, and my code is right over there on the left. I could fix it, and everything goes back to being great. So that's good, but I never wired it into the larger app. So let's go and do that. I'm going to use something. This is actually directly supported by Vitest. I'm going to use something called HappyDOM, which is a faster version of JSDOM. And when you look at the configuration for Vitest, one of the things you can find is that there's this variable called the environment variable, which has some known values. Now, how do I get all this working? First, I've got to install a package. So I will install HappyDOM. Today in Mac OS, I typed happy-dom and it auto corrected it to happy dog. I thought that was cute. I'm also going to install React testing libraries, DOM support. To give me a more React-like experience. Testing library supports a lot of frameworks. It also supports DOM, plain old JS, vanilla JS. So I'll run the install on that. Now, when I do this, let's say I write a test, and I'm going to write this test in main.js or in a new file, main.test.js, and I'll put main over here. I'm going to write a test that says test counter in main. And I'm going to expect that document exists. And when I run this, it's going to not exist. Now, why is that? Node.js is not a browser. It's a backend environment. It doesn't have a top-level variable called document. So I'm going to go and do what Dominik was just saying. I'm going to create a file, a specially named file, vitest.config.js. It will be at the top. And in there, I will tell Vitest some configuration stuff. I like the Vitest and Vite configuration approach. You can import a variable, a callable called default config. And it then even if you're not in TypeScript, it will give you autocomplete. One more. Yep. And do you think it gives me choices in here? Yes, it does. But I'm going to tell it to use happy DOM. And now when I run the tests, did I leave something out? Oh, yes. It didn't read that config file in watch mode. Or I mistyped something. Vitest config.
You might also have to enable globals.
No. This was I think you're right, because that was a switch from Vitest 3 to Vitest 4. So what I'll do, I will do the globals thing that you're talking about. Is it in test globals or is it? Yep. And what do you know the value I should put for this?
It should be true.
All right. There's another way of doing this. Let me see if I can get. It created that file in the .idea directory. So what I'll do is I'll just start over. I do not need that. Lying the whole time about the config. And did I type that correct? I do have another project with all of this working correctly.
You should maybe export default define config. You're just calling define config in the config file. You are not exporting it. Export space default space.
Okay, thank you. Good catch. Okay, so at this point, we now have a document that exists, and Vitest handles the creation and teardown of this document for us. So what we want to do now is go ahead and get this wired up. We have a index.html And then we have a main function, main module. If I try to go ahead and include this, if I try to import this, it will try to execute this line. So for example, if I said document.body.inner HTML equals, and I tried to do something from main, like import that, it's going to directly execute that, and it will fail because none of that stuff exists yet. So what I want is to put this in a function that I can call that doesn't happen at import time. So what I'll do is I will wrap all of that in a function. I'll call it export function setup. And then over here, I can say setup. It generates the import for me. Because I'm not, actually, I don't need to. I need to just run it. I don't need to set it. It has access to the document already. Don't need this line. So now it doesn't have document.html yet. And so what it doesn't have is app. So what I need to do before this is document.body.inner HTML equals div. Change that to a template string. Always do template strings. And it wants app. Okay. Now I actually have that entire component, not the wrapping document. The entire component is there. I'd like to write a test that is a little bit more meaningful of a test. And I'll go ahead and do all the typing for this. Test, I've got it over here. Renders a clickable block. And I've got the same, actually, I'll just convert this one up here. What I want to do is grab the button using testing library. Const button equals green. Did the import for me by role. By role. And this is going to be a button. I will save it, and it passed. If I change that to some other role, it would fail. I've got the button now, and I want the I expect the button's inner HTML to equal count is 0. That's the starting point. Then I want this to equal 1. My test fails. I need to do something in between. AppyDom and React Testing Library together let you simulate a click. I save it, and my button is now 1. I will pause there, take some questions, and do some commentary. First, Dominik or Sergey, got anything you want to add about Vitest and document testing?
Yes, Vitest is a unit testing framework first, but as Paul has already shown, component testing with testing library and HappyDOM is really easy to add. Vitest also has all this cool setup and tear down functionality. So in a more real world setting, you wouldn't initialize this inside the test case, but you would set up the document in setup and then just have the test functions reuse a fresh document every time automatically.
And I do that quite a bit as well. I set mocks in that setup function, globals and things like that. Let me get into the debugger real quick. So I'm working. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, a quick note. So about documenting using tests, Vitest has a feature called in-source testing, I guess. So you write your code and you write test near the code, so the test can be run. So it ensures that your source code is actually is working correctly. But you don't place your test in a separate test file, but just right near the code.
Right. That is a more popular mode of development than I expected. I thought people would only want to experiment with that, but we have gotten some feedback about that. What Sergey is saying, in this function, I would put something down here that was the test. It wouldn't be in a separate file. Is that what you're talking about?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, let me get you here, Paul.
Go ahead. Sorry.
This mode is like, I'm old. I don't really get putting test code right next to the application code. I love the separation in a separate file, but Vitest and when you build it, it's still completely separate. So if you write really small components, putting the test code in the same file can be a great experience too. And you're right, people asked for it a lot, and it was added to Vitest, and it's being used. So if you are that kind of person, it works. Try it. Maybe you'll be surprised.
It might be a little bit like snapshot testing. It's an easy way to kind of get into it, and then later you'll move to more unit test approaches. Okay, let's say that I'm running all my tests and something goes wrong. I don't really know why. Just know that one of my tests fail. I'm running, it fails. What I want to do is start poking around. A lot of people start sprinkling console log statements, or they head over to Chrome and try and use its debugger. And that's just not that friendly. Instead, what you can do is, let's say I put a breakpoint right there, or in this case, no, I'll put a breakpoint right here and run it under the debugger. And I've run all tests under the debugger, and it stops in this breakpoint. And I can start poking around. I can see the count is 0, and the counter is 0 at this point because it says 0 right there. And now I can step into some code, and the line goes to here. And I'm trying to figure out what the problem is. And I see, oh, that's what the problem is. I've got a capital C there. And you let it run, and it comes to the breakpoint, and I'll remove the breakpoint this time, just tell it to resume, and my tests pass. That is such a great way to work that what I wind up doing is I do this first. I run the debugger all the time. ABD, always be debugging. It's so fast, especially in watch mode, that even on a huge project, you might as well be in the debugger. Why? To avoid doing a separate step when you just want to poke around and you want to see this counter. Is it an integer or is it a float? What is it? And I put a breakpoint there, and I just hit space and save, and it runs and it stops at that point. And I can bring up look at the variables. I can do type of and look at a variable. I can go up the scopes to see the values of everything that was passed along the way. Where did something fall through the cracks? It isn't really debugging because there wasn't a problem. I'm just poking around. And then when I'm done, I just say run and let it continue running until it's finished. So for me, that is working under the debugger is a great way to work. If you wind up, let's say you're not in a debugger and you're not in watch mode and you're running and the tests pass and then the tests don't pass and you wonder why, this is what was there before. I can hover over one of these and get the squiggly. Yep, I'm using an EAP. This is what would have popped up on hover, and I can say debug this, and it sets a breakpoint for me, lets me poke around, and then when I'm done, it removes the breakpoint. So it's an easy way when I'm not yet in debug mode or watch to quickly start debugging. That combines with the speed of watch mode, the speed of Vitest, sitting in Node.js, sitting in the tool, and I still haven't gone to the browser to look at this component. I simulated clicking on it, and I did all these other things. I will add one more point. I'll go back to all tests, and I'll run it, this time not under the debugger. Let me go fix the test. So it's running. I could run it one last way, which is if you want to go further with testing and see, have I written enough tests? That's something called coverage. And I can run this run configuration under coverage. And it will pop up and it will tell me I don't have that dependency. And this is such a nice thing that WebStorm does for me. It will go and install that dependency, record it in my package JSON, rerun under coverage, and now I get to see how much coverage do I have. I will hide that because this is what I'm focused on. What lines don't have coverage? Let's say I take that out. I'm in watch mode. It ran again instantly because it knew what changed. Coverage works with the dependency graph too. And it tells me I don't have coverage there. It's red. Later on, I write all my tests. Test show count exists. Blah, 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 blah. Expect. Blah, 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 blah. When I save, it reruns really fast and tells me what I have coverage for. I find that to be really impressive on the Vitest side to have super fast coverage, and on the WebStorm side to integrate it into, it's in the IDE because it's over here, but it's actually in the editor as well with these color codings on the sidebars in the gutter. I'll pause there and let either of you talk about coverage while I get set up for the last few things. AppTech has a question. What is your experience? AppTech, it's like you asked me to go to the next step. I will bring up another project that has a bunch of tests in it. Dominik or Sergey, do either one of you want to comment on coverage?
I have to say this install dialog is probably teamwork between Vitest and WebStorm, because Vitest also suggests you to install missing dependencies.
We just make it clickable. Yeah.
Yeah, but it works great together. And the visualization with the coverage that shows you the lines immediately that miss tests, it's so much nicer than having to read, in file name, blah, 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 line 155 is not covered. And then you go back to the gutter and start scrolling. And it's such a great way. And also people probably don't even appreciate what you've just shown enough.
Sure.
Like having to run the browser to get the debugger to break at a point in your application code where you want it to. Like in other tools, you have to set that breakpoint, start the dev server, and then start clicking around in your application. And it takes you like 10 seconds to even hit that breakpoint, which is even like, it could be a minute or two if it's a worse setup. But
it's enough,
with your
it's
setup,
friction that you won't do it, right?
Yeah, but with your setup, it was like 10 milliseconds.
Yeah.
And this is such a great idea. I love it. I'm going to build things this way from like right now on, and I'm questioning my life choices because I haven't found this way.
Yeah, it's such muscle memory for me to now move my cursor 20 pixels to the right and press space. And then Prettier winds up reformatting the file anyway and removing that space.
Yeah.
Sergey, do you have anything you want to add about coverage?
Well, what I like about adding support for coverage in Vitest is that it was very, very natural. So actually, it was very, very simple thing. So I hope it should work just yeah, I hope it should just work.
I remember when you first did the demo in our weekly feature demo calls, and you did coverage and it ran in watch mode and it recalculated coverage instantly. I was shocked. It's such a great development experience. It's like, as you type, I can type like markdown rendering. You can type and the markdown renderer keeps up with it. It's almost like this in this mode, whether it's debugging or coverage. It's fantastic. Okay, we'll do last segment. I'll show something a little, well, last and a half segment. I'll show something a little bit bigger for app tech. And then Raul has Svelte kit. So Dominik, you take that one while I get set up.
Yes, we added Vitest as an option to the Create Svelte template. It's probably not the most used IDE for Svelte to use WebStorm, but I use it for building Vite plugin Svelte and some other things. Everything works, but I can't comment that much on IDE integration because I'm an old school command line guy. So most of the things Paul shows you here with clicking around or using the run dialog, I just type some weird commands and everything works the same way for me. But that's just me and my habits. So everyone has to build their own. And if you have questions, hit me up on Svelte Discord and we'll find our way.
Maybe someone on the WebStorm team can post into chat an answer with a link to a UTrack ticket if we have it for Svelte kit integration. We're rolling out Astro support right now, so we need to finish that first. Okay, into a little bit of a bigger example using React and TypeScript. This is from the scaffold. If we did new project and I said Vite and I chose React and TypeScript, it would be like that. And what I did was I wrote a little Python program to generate a lot of components and a lot of tests. So a lot of components that look like this, a dumb presentational component, and a lot of tests that look like this. Go render it, grab the link, and assert that it does the right thing. So when I'm firing this up, it is not that fast. Well, it's not that fast for one particular reason. It's running Happy DOM a lot, 61 times, because it's got to render every single thing. There's also a ticket. Dominik and I were talking about it. The use of threads in Vite causes some startup time performance, maybe. There's a long discussion about that. But here's our answer. Don't worry about it. You're in watch mode. So if you're developing and you make a mistake, well, that was fast. Oh, I fixed it. Oh, well, that was fast. So don't sweat startup time too much. Now, some people might find that answer unsatisfactory. App tech, you may feel like, no, I can't do watch mode all the time. There might be some workarounds where you change the number of threads used by default, or you reuse a Happy DOM document or something like that. Those workarounds are not very attractive because they break isolation. That's interesting. You make that point about Vitest and mocking. I'm willing to believe that. I find mocking in Vitest a little painful. I found it painful in Jest. PyTest is so much better on that, at least for my usages. So that's Vitest with React and TypeScript in a larger project. I'm going to finish by showing our big pet project, which is rewriting the WebStorm guide, the JetBrains, the PyCharm guide, etc. Currently in Gatsby, rewriting it in 11D with TypeScript, with TSX, with Vite, and using Vitest as a test-first environment. So I have components in 11D. Under includes, for example, I have a footer component it looks like this. And I have a test for it. Look at that. That's JSX. And I have a test for it. It looks like this. I can run this test under the debugger. Test pass, because tests are so easy, and I never go to the browser. I spend days and days, 10 hours a day, and I never go to the browser because this is so much better. If I want to stop on a place, that's not actually returning it there. Am I in the right thing? I might not be in the right thing. Oh, because I'm not in watch mode. Duh. What I'll do instead is I'll do what I do in normal development. I go and I walk up to this and I say -- watch. Now I stop on that line. And if I don't want to stop on that line, I get rid of the breakpoint, hit space, and resume. Usually what I do is it's also fast that I just go to all tests, run it under the debugger. This is how fast my entire project starts on tests. And so I had a problem there. I don't know why I had that problem. So I'll run and stop on that line. Oh, that was my problem. Okay. Got it. This time through, it works fine. And I can confirm that by looking at my tests are all green. Okay. I believe that covers all the comments and questions that we have. We will switch back to all of us on the screen for just a second and start the process of getting out from this. Anything in that last segment that you want to comment on, Dominik?
Well, it's a real-world project and not a small one at that. And I tried to see the timings, and the largest I saw was like 600 milliseconds.
Right.
So Vitest
when I fixed that one, it was 341 milliseconds.
Yeah, so it's fast for daily work and for regular projects. You can build huge generated projects with tens of thousands of tests that make it sweat. But we are not building tools that satisfy some artifactory benchmark. We are building tools to make people's development life easier. And this is a philosophy in Vitest and Vite, that it has to be practical, and we value developer productivity and speed.
Awesome.
Like, we can make things faster by skipping on isolation, but once you have to find out why your test suite is suddenly failing at random intervals because isolation isn't working anymore and tests are no longer deterministic, you have to debug this for like hours, and then you hit your head on your desk once you find out where you made the mistake. And this time you don't get it back. Like,
that's right.
When a test suite runs a few seconds slower but is more accurate, I take that any day. Speed is not everything.
Right.
Being fast is great, but the level of responsiveness and feedback you get from Vitest and Vite is basically what the human attention can match already. So being even faster doesn't make much more sense right now. So it's fast, it's great.
Fast and confusing is not very helpful. And I'm sure Sergey, with developing the IDE, which has 1 trillion tests, you learn a lot of lessons about how to write tests and the trade-offs on performance and clarity.
Well, I guess, yeah, everybody who write tests, they have some understanding how to write it better and better. But yeah, they should be deterministic, and they should be fast. Basically, this is the key here. Yeah.
Okay, we'll go ahead and wrap up. I apologize for keeping everybody a little bit longer. This was a whirlwind tour of Vitest, and I didn't even get to the React part. I've got 2 extra sets of things to show for React, which means expect other whirlwinds in the future when I beg Dominik to come back, at least for Svelte, but maybe for some other times as well. Dominik, thanks for taking the time out. Thanks for all that you do in open source, but taking the time out to talk with us today about Vitest. Before you go, what's the one takeaway idea you'd like folks to remember about Vitest?
Watch mode is awesome. It literally transformed the way you can do testing while developing. So this is probably the one feature, if I had to pick one from Vitest, which is really hard because it has a lot of awesome features. But watch mode is the one I personally have to pick and call out every day.
Yeah, I think people think, oh, it's got ES build, which is written in Go, and Go is faster than JavaScript, and that's the amazing thing. Well, no, it's watch mode. The watch mode part really does. It's order or orders of magnitude performance increase. Sergey, I know you have a lot on your mind about Vitest in the coming release cycles and stuff, but for what we have now is already amazing. What's a part of what you have delivered now that you'd like folks to try out and give comments on, or anything that you have coming next for Vitest features?
As for future development of Vitest, I think an important part here is to make dash watch behavior more consistent. Also, well, also we have an idea how to support to have a better support for monorepo, to have a better run configuration names, so they don't conflict with each other. Well, this is what we are going to do in the next release.
You know, something I never mentioned this to you. What I should do is contribute some live templates to write tests, you know. Go ahead and generate the imports and write the tests, and then give you the little spot to put the code in. We'll go ahead and start getting out of here. We'll switch over to slides. Yep, we got the slides up. If you'd like more information on WebStorm, please go to our website at jetbrains.com/WebStorm. Duh. If you haven't already, check out our WebStorm blog. Now is a great time to be looking at it because we're shipping a lot of releases. On our blog, you can find up-to-date WebStorm news and information about releases and events such as this, in addition to our educational resources. We'd love your feedback on this webinar, especially this webinar, because I'll probably do follow-ons for it. So please feel free to contact us on Twitter or in the after webinar survey, which we actually read and study and pay a lot of attention to. And we will email that out in a bit if you have registered. That's all for us today. Thank you very much for listening. Have a good rest of the day.